Welcome to Muckrakers, where we dig through the latest happenings around so-called AI. In each episode, we highlight recent events, contextualize the most important ones, and try to separate muck from meaning. I'm your host, Jacob Hames, and joining me is my co-host, Igor Kravchuk.
Thanks, Jacob. This week, we're going to do that long-promised deep dive into DeepSeek R1 and reasoning LLMs and agents and all of these fancy words, as well as how they have affected how the ecosystem behaves and how we think people should think about AGI, AI, whatever eyes you can think of going forward.
Yeah, so let's get into DeepSeek R1 and DeepSeek. It's a thing. It's been out since January, mid to late January, which means 2 months about as of recording this episode. What's new? And how does it work? And we're going to start with a little bit more technical, and then we will get to implications of what that means later.
Yeah, so I think it came out January 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it is the response of a Chinese company called DeepSeek, which is the spin-off of a hedge fund that has been making some waves with one of the Chinese LLM competitors. So they had done DeepSeek version 1, 2, and 3 incremental work, and it was all seen as kind of, oh yeah, the Chinese are really getting dangerous. Oh, they're catching up together with Quen and a few others. Mm-hmm. And then they released DeepSeek R1, where they basically managed to actually get to parity, and in some benchmarks, I think, beat the publicly available versions of O1, O3. With publicly available, I mean the non-$200 fancy version that most people didn't have.
So when you say parity, just to clarify here,
this is now just from memory. So you could pick some benchmarks where we got the same score or better than the OpenAI model, who before that was the big kid in town.
So it essentially it is competitive on the benchmarks.
Yes, it was just solidly competitive with the benchmarks. People started switching to it because it was cheaper, and they thought, oh, this is cool. I can now do the same thing for much less money.
Right.
And we're gonna go into the community reception outlook a bit later, but to a very minimal primer on what makes it new is when you have these types of models that they're trying to push the idea of reasoning model onto. What it means is you have a base model, which is the standard LLM in a sense, and because of the compute embargo that they had, DeepSeek was always going hard on efficiency. So they were using model tricks, optimization tricks to make it more efficient. And in V3, the biggest ones that people are talking about is one, it's called multi-head latent attention, which is basically a technique to reduce the memory cost of long context windows. Because when you run inference or training on long context windows, one of the things that you can do to be a bit faster is if you don't actually go autoregressive fully, you just keep all of the intermediate states in a cache, and you only ever need to add one more when you add the next token, basically. Instead of saying you literally feed in the tokens one by one, and you throw away the intermediate state every time. You keep that state there, and the downside is that you have a lot more memory cost. And when they basically first came up with a way of grouping them, there was a tweak, and then they found a way to get a shared compressed embedding of the latent embeddings. So it's a two-layer embedding. And because they share the state across some of the embeddings, they get to reduce the memory cost by quite a lot. And
gotcha.
And that, together with a bunch of implementation details, so they have custom written GPU kernels, they have custom written file systems, everything. Their training is very economical, and they've started to open source parts of that. So we know this stuff is legit. The other big thing specifically for reasoning, or like this R1, was that they came up with a new way of creating the reward signal that requires less evaluations of the reward model.
So essentially, the reward signal being the thing, as you're training the LLM, you are optimizing against something. You are trying to maximize or minimize, depending on the setup, some value, and the reward signal is what goes towards that value. And so they made a way to, you don't have to run it as many times. It's basically just a more efficient optimization algorithm in that regard, correct?
And massively more efficient, because the reward model is also an LLM. So like you're running an LLM a lot of times already. And people have reproduced their kind of like, we do this from scratch show off thing with no like seeding with reasoning traces in the pre-training for I think $50 by now, or like $30. So like you can actually like fine tune a given base model for very little money now. People have done with like as much as like 700 samples as a seed as well. And
so it's not just increasing efficiency of, I guess, like speed or number of operations that are required, but it's also increasing efficiency of the data in. Is that correct? Like you can only use 700 as opposed to what was the magnitude before?
So like before, the way OpenAI was selling the way to do reasoning is like you need to pay a bunch of PhDs to like get you lots of reasoning traces, and then you like pre-train your model on those, and then you use this RL method, reinforcement learning. That there's two steps to this. There's like the actual verifier, and then there's like the reward model, and the reward model is what gives a reward to a sentence answer to a mathematical problem, but that reward model is trained by generating a lot of like math puzzles and like solving with a computer, and then like having the text contain that reward, and that suite of verifier models and software is important to say. They didn't open source that, the DeepSeek guys, but that is the thing that's expensive to run for a training site, and then you want to not do that, so that's an efficiency thing. But then they also showed that like you don't actually need the pre-training bit. You don't need to pay a bunch of PhDs to solve it for you. You can get what looks like reasoning behavior just out of RL. That was like the big thing that shook the community a bit. That like you can just take a sufficiently good base model and start having it solve math puzzles, which you can generate just purely with compute, and you can probably bootstrap a O1 level model, which is why now everybody has one. Like,
gotcha. And so, but the word that's being used here is reasoning, right? And that's like, so how do we understand this if it's not, we're saying it's not reasoning, or at least that's what I'm saying, but then how do we make sense of you can reach this sort of level of O1 capabilities where it looks like it's the longer it's sort of given in context, it's able to create better outputs. Like, what is that about, I guess, if that makes sense?
So very brief justification why me and also you are haters on the word reasoning is that in computer science, reasoning has like a few definitions, and one of them is basically this logic computation. So for people who want to get into it, like prologue is like the way to go there, and ontologies and reason as ontologies. It's really like this logic in the sense of, if I have a fact and I have another fact and these facts are linked together, for example, like, I am a man, the king is always a man, can I be king? That is like a thing that you can answer with like yes, because like the knowledge you have entails a positive answer. And then if I was a woman, then it would say no. There's like a strict logic and there's a single answer. And because this involves like possibly linking together lots of individual facts that all give like a subset of the answer, this is very, very, very expensive to do. And it was kind of the death of the first wave of AI, the symbolic reasoning engines. And then there's also like another implementation where there's like like a generalization of this is like search. Like reasoning is you're searching a path to connect a starting point and an end point under some like very strict rule system, and every step needs to follow those rules. So like in robotics, reasoning and planning is like, if I can use in this way physically, how do I get to that point? And you don't get to like wiggle a little bit to get through, because the robot can't do it. So that's like the strict definition of reasoning. And a looser one would be like actually executing an algorithm. And LLMs do none of these. Because what they seem to be doing, and there's 2 papers that we're going to put into the show notes that like back us up, is like, we already know that if you train them on enough knowledge, they have a decent chance of just like generating you probabilistically an output that will be correct. Like,
right.
In the same way that, you know, like if you just use a dice and you randomly generate text, at some point after the universe dies of entropy a few times, you're also going to get a correct number. And LMs just like concentrate the probability distribution a bit on the human language and correct looking answer. So if you fine tune it enough and like your questions in the training data set in some way, shape or form, even if it's factorized, you have a decent chance of getting it. You might also get complete nonsense, and then like people call it hallucinations. We prefer to call it confabulation. But that's the basic of how an LLM generating it. It always makes shit up probabilistically, and it doesn't actually understand anything. It's just autocomplete, a very fancy autocomplete. But you can get a very fancy autocomplete, a very useful autocomplete. Like autocomplete is actually very useful. So like there's lots of debate around that it's kind of meaningless. And then if you just run it multiple times, if you run 10 in parallel and you take the best one, then you can increase your chance of getting the right answer. And if you run them one after each other and you always say, hey, did I get this right? If not, please come up with an alternative solution. You also increase your chance of getting a new one. So like you can scale your compute, basically just the amount of times you try stuff, and increase your chance of working.
And so this is essentially just making the context window like longer, right? Where it's giving.
This comes later. Like like this is literally just like the paper's called like large stochastic monkeys or something like that. And it's just like you're just trying more. Like, you know, like if you have a 60% chance of getting it right and you try 10 times, you know, much higher.
Yes.
So, and like at some point the simple strategies saturate, and then like what RL seems to be doing is that's the other thing is like we have been getting more and more context window capabilities, but we've been struggling to train it to really make use of it. Mm-hmm. And people have been figuring out some ways of doing that, both with like different prefix training. But one issue is that like you just don't have a lot of tasks comparatively that need of context window. Like, and the ones that we have are very difficult to get like completions on. So this next token prediction is very difficult to get signal on if you want to do a long context. Sure, you can say read this whole book and summarize it, but you don't have training data for that.
Right. So sorry. for context, the context window is just the information that the LLM is acting upon, right? So that's going to be whatever.
Act upon. That's an important thing.
So yeah, not can act upon. So it's the information that's provided in the system prompt plus the information provided by the user plus the amount of output that's been generated thus far.
Yeah.
And so as that gets longer, you can, I guess, do more things with it. If you can pick the parts of that you actually care about. But we don't have a ton of good training data on picking the parts that you actually care about from the long context and like stringing together an idea. Is that more or less?
It's exactly that. Like if you're trying to solve a very difficult problem, if you do it in one chunk, it's going to be difficult. And if you break it into smaller chunks, then it's going to be a longer problem. So if you don't have the ability to like follow a long context window, then you can't do it. And we had been pushing the ability to actually process the vectors. So like, you have like a sequence where there's like 1 million tokens. Each is represented as like 1,000-dimensional vector. So we have like 1 million by 1,000. And then in normal attention, you have a quadratic complexity. And then we have been getting better at like managing that memory complexity and that computational complexity. Both with like just not doing all of the quadratic element, but also by making it really efficient for our hardware. Mm-hmm. But that is only like the implementation. The training is a separate thing. You need to get signal to actually make use of all of that context, which you can do by creating synthetic data, but that's not as rich as real problems. You could do it if like, you have a bunch of books and you always give a cliff notes, but then you only learn to do cliff notes and you don't learn anything else with that. So it's difficult to get like generic long context window signal. And you can fake it, but actually utilizing it is difficult. And one of the things that this RL verification allows you is you can just make an arbitrary long story, put some like facts into that you you programmatically generated, mm-hmm. and when you ask a question that you have like constructed with this classic AI system like knowledge bases that has like internal logic, and then you ask for the answer, and then you can verify that. So you can like generate arbitrary training data for things that you can kind of like logically verify. And that's just signal at that point. And then you can make use of the context window. And that is probably what drove this big shift. This is entering like a bit like the vibe territory, but like the one paper I already mentioned, the other paper that is important to mention is that like people call it chain of thought, people call it reasoning, but it's not, because you can just ask R1 to output like ... like the word dot or the dot character, instead of actually spelling things out, and it can still sometimes then answer questions it couldn't solve before. And they call them unfaithful chain of thought. It's like more like it's gibberish. Like it's just at more text being output, and the LLM will output this text and then jump off the text into something completely different if the chain of thought was not already like priming it enough. Like it's not necessarily using the logic that is being output. It's just generating tokens. And then one important detail to think about from a technical perspective is that because these are auto-regressive models, like every token it outputs is like a whole pass of a network that can do more information refinement.
Okay.
And so like if you just output more tokens, it can implement longer latent algorithms. But for that, you again need to have this context window that can handle that. So
essentially, when like as the for chain of thought models, that are using this sort of like so-called reasoning or have the longer chain of thought context, what's actually happening is essentially like more information that's sort of slightly correlated is being included, and more passes are going over that, because each time a new token is output, you see like the model does an additional pass. So the end result has had more computation put into it, and therefore can get to more like complex sort of processes. Is that correct?
Yes, for like simple example, like it's very difficult for the model to like look at a text and count elements. Mm-hmm. But if you just make it spell out every word and keep a running counter, then it can do it. If it can actually maintain cohesion on every step. And like there is an actual new thing that is trained into these models, which is with like single step cohesion is higher, but it's still not perfect, and it's still not grounded in the sense that it doesn't need to make sense for a human level. It just needs to make sense in the like text embedding, weird like remixing vector embeddings that have some semantic meaning but don't fully map to how we think about things. And like the answers this paper provides evidence for that, and like a bunch of other stuff also does, but people can also just run experiments. So I did this just today while we were like prepping. I showed you the results. Like if you take these classic puzzles, like river crossing, where usually it's like a duck, a fox, and a bunch of wheat, and something eats everything, and like you need to like bring them over.
Yeah, it's like a little logic problem where you have to go one way and then go the other. It's a classic riddle that I used to tell at the summer camp that I worked. That was a LARP summer camp, because it's just, it's a great one for that sort of setting. But yeah, it's just a little logic problem. You have to get across the river. The different things that you have to bring across the river have different interactions with each other, and you don't want like certain things to be together or to be alone, and you need to get everything across given that.
Like usually it's like you can't leave a fox alone with a duck, because when the duck gets eaten, you can't leave the duck alone with a wheat, because when the wheat gets eaten. So like you need to like always bring like the pair that will eat each other, and then leave one of them and bring over the other one. And like if you ask this puzzle, but you ask it in a simplified way, for example, you ask like about 3 vegetables, or you ask about like a duck, a cabbage, a potato, and some wheat, and you tell it that just the duck will run away if you leave it alone, it's just gonna follow a template. It's gonna follow, oh yeah, like I can't bring these together. So like the duck cannot be left alone with anything, but then the vegetables can't be left alone either. So how do I do this? And it gets completely tripped up, because the text features that make up the solution are not in the training data set. Mm-hmm. And there's no actual logic going on, so it can't do it. So then it comes up with stuff like, oh yeah, actually, upon closer inspection, the wording is the duck will run away when unsupervised, not when it's unsupervised by me. So actually, the cabbage can supervise the duck, and then it won't run away. Or if you do it with like 4 vegetables, it's going to tell you, oh, but this is impossible, because it kind of has a semantic notion that they are all the same, because it gets encoded into the same vector, but it doesn't have a logic for, because they are all the same, I don't need to use this puzzle, and that it just has learned the puzzle. And it's very much like a student that has memorized rote algorithms and just throws like, addition with carrying the digit at every problem. Like if it's like long division, he's still gonna try to like do the same symbolic manipulation. So that's why we say it's not reasoning, and it's much more like accurate to think about this as a very long context window with like multiple attempts to kind of like amplify the like resonance of the right answer that might or might not happen, but it's still doing even though it's discredited, it's like a useful image with Daniel Kahneman's System 1 type thinking. Whereas like when people hear reasoning, they think of a System 2 type thinking, which is like this methodical, step by step. Every step is globally cohesive with all previous steps. And you can see in the benchmarks, it probably helps to train with reasoning models. But the actual compute time inference scaling thing is questionable if it's not, again, in the datasets. So like Claude 3.7 without thinking token budget on the Ada LLM benchmark is only like 5% worse than the one with thinking. Even though, you would expect that like for coding and like very semantically strict and like syntax-oriented things, reasoning would be much better. But both the benchmark and like the vibe in the community is kind of saying, no, actually, like it's not that much better. Like, and
yeah, so essentially like this reasoning, like reasoning models, so to speak, is the term they're being called. They seem to have like marginal performance gains on some tasks, and on some tasks they have like marginal regressions even. So like they're different. But they're not like this isn't a paradigm shift, right? We haven't gotten substantially, or maybe it is, but we haven't gotten substantially new like capabilities from this. Is that fair to say?
I would be more careful. I would say kind of like the long context window thing is useful. And yes. Like the current, like Gemini, Google was always the kings of long context window. And they now seem to have nailed down all of the rest. And it shows that like a long context window is really, really, really important, actually. Okay. So I think there are definitely new capabilities, but it's very difficult to disentangle where they're coming from. Is it just more training data, more curation, bigger models, like run the optimizer for longer? We have, like, there's like all of these other things that go into this. And I think it's difficult to say for certain, even though people who know me might be surprised, but I try not to do hot takes just like overconfidently. I would say like it's likely that the reasoning aspect is actually not useful, and it's kind of masking the effect of long context elements and retrials and the systems people build around this, and then interacting with it, and that you could, like, I wouldn't be surprised if in two years we see a paper that says, oh, you don't need RL, you can just do a single step logic cohesion loss on these like auxiliary tasks, and then you're done, and then you can skip the whole reward model completely. Like, I could see that happening, that like the main thing is that like you have like memorization plus recall, like lots of knowledge embedded into the weights, plus a context window, plus the thing being trained to exhibit these aha things, because people were also doing butt forcing as one thing. Like there was one paper that basically like let the LLM let the LLM run its thing and put the end token, because the LLM can output like, okay, I'm done, and then just remove the end token, insert.
Then you can force the butt.
Exactly. You can say, oh wait, but, and then you can like force it to output what looks like a reasoning stream, and that will also improve performance. So I don't know. I don't want to do too much of a hot take, but I'm skeptical how much the RL is actually adding, because one thing that is like, we didn't discuss in the meeting, but this is like my hopefully correct like expert knowledge in air quotations. RL really sucks. Like reinforcement learning is this type of thing that like you don't want to do that ever, which is why the whole field of like robotics reinforcement learning is now doing imitation learning, like following trajectories we have been given, because reinforcement learning as a thing is it's literally, like, mathematically, it's not hyperbole. It's literally just directed random search. Like, the fancy word is a zero order of the optimization algorithm. It's literally like, I know how to do a thing. I'm gonna do a random change on how I do that thing, and I will observe which of these two random changes looks better, and I'm gonna, like, change accordingly. So it's a really,
turns out that's
really,
a really bad algorithm.
It is, which is why nobody uses it like in its raw form, and it was always surprising to me that it works that well on like LLMs, and I was thinking, okay, like, it's not really RL because they're more doing like imitation learning, like the PPO thing that they did. It's not really RL. It's doing like technical detail that makes it not really RL. It's imitation learning. This is actually RL, so it was always weird to me that it would work. So my theory is that it doesn't actually, and it's more like it provides a tiny amount of signal, but a lot of other parts in the system that people are doing is carrying the weight, and you can probably unlock that little bit that RL gives you in other ways. That is like my semi-careful hot take. I might also be wrong on this. Like, if this is one of these, like, if we have listeners who want to send me an email, do so. But that's my take.
Before we go on to like too far on, one thing that you mentioned in that, like, just a little bit ago, was training, and I wanted to hit back on the claims from OpenAI that OpenAI O1 outputs were used to train the R1 from DeepSeek. So, like, there have now been, I guess, more compelling and multiple examples of people getting DeepSeek to say, I'm an OpenAI chat model, so I can't do XYZ. So that seems like relatively compelling. But like, yeah, why do we think that this is probably true? Of course, I don't actually give a shit because, like, fuck off OpenAI. But why do we think this is true? And also, like, why would they do this? Why is it valuable to do this? Just, like, make that a little bit more clear. Because I think we've referenced it slightly, but it could be.
So one interesting thing is that, like, one of the analysis works that we're also drawing our insights from, we're going to be linking it, is like the Sale SG Oat 0 GitHub repository found evidence that it isn't actually beneficial. But, like, the reason why that claim is really true is that, at least in the sense that there are O1 outputs in the wild, because people have, like, there's this shared GPT site from way ago, and people just share these things. Mm-hmm. And DeepSeek uses everything they can get their hands on to train their models, just like everybody else.
Right.
And DeepSeek v3 was just trained as a normal, like, base LLM model. So that was probably trained on everything they could get their hands on. It also makes sense to actively mine O1, because like the meme that I have in my head is like, oh, it's free real estate. It's like somebody else did the work of like distilling humans. Why would you not do it? Like, they can't stop you. Like you're in China. Like they're not gonna, like, be able to enforce anything against you. And even if you were in the US, like the one of the few happy things that happened is, like, multiple, like, federal courts have confirmed that, like, AI output is not copyrightable. So like, you can just, like, mine O1, and the worst thing they can do is fine, like, sue you for, like, contract infringement. But, like, good luck with that.
And also, that just sort of goes back to something we've mentioned before with, like, cost of doing business. I mean, I saw something going viral this week that was like, California has a law against, having a really tall fence. But Bezos has a fence that exceeds that height, and he's just totally cool paying the fine, and he doesn't do anything about it. So every month he gets fined, and he doesn't give a shit, because why would he? It's literally a non-meaningful amount of money to him. And that's basically what this would be as well.
Yeah.
So, cost of doing business.
Separate thing of like all civil and like criminal fines need to be expressed as percentages of your income, but that's a like separate, or wealth. Separate thing. So like the reason why you would do this is because people expected RL to be shit, and it usually is that you would expect that the more you can do in the pre-training phase, the easier it's gonna be for you. And there's probably some truth to that like if you don't have like evidence of very careful reasoning patterns, like the verbalizations that humans do when they do things step by step, then it's not going to be able to like pick up on those chains. And so they probably mined those as much as they could. But because the base model is very much a stochastic parrot and just outputs the most likely next token based on like some local context, in this OAT0 repo, they call it superficial self-reflection, which is basically like the non-cohesive generative pattern, and that actually hurts the performance. So that's why in all of these reproductions, the length of the responses, it first goes up and then goes down, or it goes up, goes down, goes up again, complicated pattern. But like there's this go up, go down, and that's basically like the model just like outputting more gibberish and randomly hitting the right answer. And then at some point the actual like reinforcement learning reward kicks in, and it starts to like shorten the reward, because that's where the actual logical cohesion kicks in. And it's probably not self-reflection like everybody's trying to like frame it as, but it's logical cohesion. So like you can keep this internal consistency for a bit longer, and you also have more context window that you're actually using effectively before compressing it into vibes.
Okay.
But that's the answer on why would they want to do that, and
Yeah, I guess just going into, so from what you just said, the thing that seems to be happening as a result of these sort of updates or technological improvements that we've been talking about is the idea of like more agents / deep research, right? So that's deep research is not something that was created by DeepSeek. It was originally created by Google before DeepSeek came out with their most recent model, the R1 and that sort of stuff. So it just happens to be like a similar naming thing, but the underlying properties and like the reason that it works are actually tied to this idea of longer context window and being able to leverage that in a valuable way. So
is my hypothesis
what we're thinking. I guess we're not totally sure on that. I'll just give an idea of deep research is now created. There's something for each of the different LLM models, as well as like Perplexity has its own, and so do a couple other AI like product organizations / corporations. And essentially what it is you ask a question, the model then looks up information in like a search and creates outputs sequentially. So it says like, I'm answering this portion of the question. Now I'm answering this portion of the question. And it's using the inputs from the searches as context for those. And then it does a bunch of them. And then it takes all of those and puts them together and gives you an output. And that takes time to do, depending on which setup it is, like a very small to, very, very long amount of time, depending on how long you're wanting to wait and that sort of thing. So that's like what it is in terms of the user facing side. But getting into like what's happening, what's it about, how's it work? Just like very briefly as sort of an application of all this stuff that we've been talking about.
And also two things, like tool use was a thing before already.
Right.
Of like you predefine a description of what tools are available. You tell them, if you output this string, I'm gonna like call a tool that will tell you like what the weather is like in the city that you ask for, and then you handle that. And this is kind of like an extension of this, of like the tool is now a search engine, and you actually like do the search, and you use like normal index methods to do that search. That's one aspect, that like tool use was a thing before it, but it didn't really take off, and there's a question mark around that. And you need that context window and that ability to actually aggregate, because you're supposed to also not just like do more searches, but like refine your searches with information that you found, and maybe make like a plan for what you're going to be searching for. That's like this agentic element that comes into that, which, you know, it boils down to having a system prompt. Hey, before you do the search, like output reasonable search keywords, all of that stuff. But that's why it's like difficult to disentangle again how much of this is like a reasoning advance, how much is it just okay, we now have like longer context windows so it can actually do more searches, and it's actually gonna like not forget what it's supposed to do while it reads the first response.
Right. And then I guess sorry, go ahead.
No, after you.
Oh, so I guess the only thing I was thinking is the other like thing to read into this sort of advent of deep research, deep search, whatever you want to call it, is people seem to be more okay with waiting longer than milliseconds for the output now. So as a result, we're getting systems that, you know, take advantage of that and run for longer. And I think that that is also like a meaningful thing to be updating on.
Yeah, this is an observation that was made by, one second, Gina.ai, which I'd never heard of before. Like, that was actually a very thoughtful take on that. It draws this distinction between deep search and deep research, where like one of them is this agentic search loop. The other one is like that search loop, but then like with a nice like report structure on top of it.
Right.
And goes into a bunch of details on what makes this like a actually like challenging problem. But like in that blog post, they point out that like, okay, O1 preview, which came out in September 2024, kind of like primed people to really wait a long time. Like,
that's true.
It was excruciatingly slow. So it became absolutely okay to just like wait for 3 minutes while the LLM was doing something. And that probably was why originally like the Google thing didn't take off. Because at that point, people were like not as okay with it. I think it was in October or September. So like there's this thing of like Google not being like in the meta at the time. So people didn't play with it, but also like less people were ready to wait this long. And then with deep research, and also one of the changes I think that came out of a DeepSeek thing, and I'm realizing as I'm talking, it's like DeepSeek showed the chain of thought gibberish.
Yeah.
And it was entertaining for people. And then OpenAI also started showing that. And I think deep research launched with the detailed like log of what it's doing.
Yeah. I guess that just like anecdotally, sometimes the log is actually like useful too. Not always, but sometimes it is. One kind of funny example from me is I was using it to try to find a couple experts for something to like see if, you know, probably all of the internet has a better idea of, you know, relevant experts to this niche thing that I don't know very well than I do. And so it actually found a couple, but it got fixated on those couple, and it said their names like a bunch in the reasoning, and then no names were output. And this was on a Gemini deep search. I thought that was pretty funny. I guess at least they clean the end result for sensitive information. But yeah.
We had a thing where let's say like one of my coworkers' name is Bob, which it isn't, but like, you know, a bit of the anonymization, and one of our interns who works with him must have somehow triggered the like memory thing of OpenAI, because like O1, both the transcript and the output just became Bob, 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 just that name until he purged the cache with like memory cache. So like,
okay,
so
that's wild.
So like, it goes also to this point where about like, it's much more accurate to think of these models as like amplifying like resonances from their training data sets to like give you like the ones that survive like a constructive and destructive interference process, when something that actually like thinks how humans would think, and so like it can get into these weird modes of like some modes in the sense like combinations that self-reinforce, that it actually like kind of like accidentally went in, but then it's such a strong attractor, then it gets stuck. But yeah, so this is the agentic element, and like the key driver again, like it's not good. Like so that's one of the things I think is it's not like it's completely useless, and there are certain things that are so rote that they can be done by these things, but the vibe is very much still, it's not good. And like most of the actual like normal people testimonials that I hear are like, oh yeah, it's almost useful. It's like
yeah. And then like a lot of just like I mean, you can like search for like pseudo interesting like random facts really well, which is kind of fun. But like
I actually use it quite intensively as a search engine for certain things, where like I want to find different stuff than I would find if I used my search engine stuff.
That's true. That is a good benefit of it, because like, you know, everyone's search engine is different because, you know, corporate data and all that stuff. So it is nice because it does give you sort of a way to get more like content sources.
Yeah, so there is utility here. Like there's always this thing, but like I think it's like always like the theme of like macroec is that like it's not like it's completely useless. It's just that the hype hides the actually cool bits of it, and we need to dial it down a bit. So like the way it's useful for me is like sometimes, if I know that a task is very common, I can just do it. And sometimes it very much can't. But also sometimes I just open up 10 tabs and I have like, you know, 3 or 4 different search engines, 3 or 4 different LLMs, and I just like copy paste the search query in all of them, and then I verify and look through the outputs. So yeah, I think like it's also the most promising approach to get like utility out of these models is gonna be this running your own version of a stochastic monkey approach, where you spam queries to even the same LLM multiple times with like slight variations, or use different models in parallel. And then you do your own like aggregation and verification step. And it's also how I see most people use them. So that's maybe like another takeaway from both how it works, but like our experience and what we observe.
Yes. And so with all of the context now that we have, the question is like, what did people do when this came out, and as this was becoming clear? And the reaction was much more maybe significant than one might think, based on how we've been describing these technical sort of updates. So when DeepSeek was first released, well, that was January 20th, and then it took essentially a week for people to catch wind of it, and then people, I think, and I've mentioned this on the previous sort of like teaser episode for this one, that people were ready for the other shoe to drop, and so, or in terms of just like people are expecting there to be some sort of bubble burst kind of thing, and so Nvidia stock crashed. And then it slowly built back up, not quite to where it was, but almost. And then it began falling again. And at this point, we can't be sure that this was relevant to DeepSeek. It was probably somewhat tied to it, but it was also probably mostly relevant or mostly related to just the chaos that's happening in the U.S. government and, you know, the tariffs, not being able to sell to China, various things like that. So yeah, at this point, which is sort of like mid-February or early to mid-February, it becomes more like, can we attribute DeepSeek to this or this to DeepSeek? But it's probably somewhat tied to it.
When we say crash, we're talking about like a cool $1 trillion market cap being wiped out. So like,
yeah.
That was I think 25%. Like it looks very impressive on the chart, and there was also like immediate panic in some Silicon Valley frontier companies. So like Meta, we had like leaks about war rooms being held, where basically people were discussing like, what the fuck? Why didn't we do this? And like juicy details like one executive salary on the LLM Gen AI team being more budget than DeepSeek had initially claimed that they use, which is debatable. We're going to put some links in the show notes on details on those claims. But there was like a lot of like, oh shit, the Chinese are here now. We need to like reverse engineer in their tech and incorporate it. And then a few days, weeks afterwards, basically everyone and the dog had a reasoning model, which they probably might have been working on before already, but it's also like not impossible that everybody just took DeepSeek stuff and threw it in the mix.
So like thinking about updates that we've seen since then, let's start with OpenAI / Microsoft. Microsoft sort of like maybe distanced from OpenAI.
I mean, they immediately started hosting R1.
Well, yeah. I guess that you can call that distancing in a way. But yeah, definitely not something that they would do if they were fully on board with, you know, OpenAI, this is our product kind of thing. So that is definitely interesting. But that's, I think, probably more related to just like commoditization and current state of current state of geopolitics.
I think it might also be to do like I think it's both always. Like these two causal chains as mentioned is like both, and then like in the early episodes of Macroacres we talked about how I think like Microsoft is using OpenAI basically as a fall boy, but like they're not selling their own model because they're happy to have OpenAI just like eat the pain, and then like they will at some point do the second system, and it might have been the trigger that they see as, oh fuck, okay, like our little racing horse isn't the fastest horse anymore, so daddy needs to assume direct control. That might be the thing that, because the report was that they're developing their own in-house reasoning models, probably based on DeepSeek stuff. And yeah, who knows? I think for now it's been holding since this news got launched. But OpenAI also had like a more direct response, I would claim.
Yeah, so that was like the release of GPT 4.5, and it seems like they felt like they needed it, like they needed to release something, basically, because it is trash. It's trash garbage. It's not good. No one talked about it, basically. Like, it was incredibly easy to forget.
Absolutely overpriced, but scaling totally hasn't stopped, like they just chose to abort it early and they didn't really try, and like it's not actually what they had set out to do or whatever. Like it read very much like we needed to generate some hype, and they tried to dress it as like, oh, this has EQ, and it nails the tone of a metafiction just right, and like I said, it's just trash, like expensive slop and trash. They also launched like an agents platform, which I think also nobody cared about. But I think that was them trying to lean in harder and keep the lead on this this new meme that people have latched onto now, that is agentic everything. That is this, we will now wait for our LLMs to do stuff much longer, basically. That's like the main takeaway.
Yep. And then the last thing related to Microsoft is just that they're cutting data center scaling. So they had previously said, we're going to make more data centers, and now they are not thinking that's as viable.
With the nuance being that like there might be other stuff on the way. There's like difficulty in fully assessing it, but like they're not joining the 100 billion or however it was, like this massive investment project that Trump launched with ChatGPT 4.1. So definitely no longer like fully committed. There's also the trend of, on the agentic train, of people trying to justify, oh yeah, these are totally useful now. So Meta,
right,
OpenAI, Anthropic, everyone had some cringe attempt of showing how useful the models actually are.
And I was surprised by this, even the Stanford, I forget what they create it's from Stanford. They create the like AI report index or AI index report. And even that, said on it that like one of the key takeaways for the like economy chapter was like the data is in, AI makes people more productive. But then the evidence that they have for that is just incredibly non-compelling. When you actually look at it, it's like people in this small portion, like in this specific, coding environment, basically have said anecdotally or qualitatively that they think it improves their effectiveness and their productivity. And that's it. There isn't any actual studies. So that are referenced in it. I could be slightly wrong in that. I'm fairly certain, though. It was... So even this... the reason I'm bringing that up specifically is that even this group that I would say I think has a higher standard for this sort of thing. They don't have a model themselves. They shouldn't be supporting this out of like personal financial gain. Are sort of caught up in the hype here of it's going to be, incredibly economically useful. And that's not to say that it's not going to be. But I think the claims are a little overblown.
So
to say the least.
I have I agree that it's like the evidence-based based take. I would add to that like, if we go into why, so like the meta index thing actually seemed the most reasonable to me, because they're basically just pointing at like, look, all of these companies are building on YAML and making money, and they're also counting stuff, like medical device assistants, and it's very mundane shit, basically. It's not like agents. So that one actually buy that there's some form of like economic utility, even if it's only like all of the runs on your own device, privacy-aware transcription bots that people have made. So, like, sure, I buy that.
Sure.
Anthropic did a thing that really was disappointing to me. They took all of their free chat users, only the chat users, and then, like, ran stats on them on what tasks are being done with them. And so, oh look, it's not actually like the copywriters or other people. It's mainly like the programmers and the executives who are using it. So obviously we're creating lots of value and not replacing anybody. And
of course, that didn't include the corporate customers.
It did include the paid customers. It did include the API, and like the main thing that's gonna like replace any worker is gonna be the API, not like chat interface. So complete.
But of course, they're also marketing it, and in more like AI safety concerned circles, at least for a little bit there, people were saying like, oh, what about this thing as sort of like a, at least they're looking out, and you could use this as an indicator, like a warning system. And, that just shows the amount of disingenuity that's being put into the marketing and the sharing of these sorts of artifacts. Yes, it's good to have that information. It's nice that they made it somewhat public without actually releasing the data set, because they did pre-processing on it for privacy, but then they also did probably more than is necessary. So you don't get as many insights as you might want. So it's good that exists.
I disagree.
And that
actually,
is accessible.
Like I think this.
Oh, you think
this is a biased measurement? I think it's actively harmful. I think this is negative information.
I guess my thought process here is it's valuable to have, but it shouldn't be thought of in the way that it's being represented. And so if you are to essentially, because of how it's been talked about and how it's been shared, it is not valuable because it is being shared as it is this thing when it's not. If it was in a vacuum and it was clearly said to be this is biased, but here is the data, I feel like that's I think that is decent to have access to. It's not that big of a boon though.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
So philosophically, I agree with you. Kind of if we were living in a platonic void and just purely, I give you the full caveat and then this data set, so I can just discard it at will, and then if I know I can account for the bias, then I can do this. But in the real world, where we are monkeys with limitations, I think it's already net negative. Kind of it's kind of equivalent to go into a US school, do IQ tests on all of the kids, remove all the smart black kids, and then release the data and say, oh, but it might be slightly biased, but it's still useful, right? No, it's not. You've fully poisoned the well towards one particular interpretation of the outlook. And it's cherry-picked data.
Yeah.
It's cherry-picked and biased data, and they don't disclaim that strongly enough. There's not a big fat red thing. This data is useless. We can't share the data from our API. But if we could, we expect this to be very completely differently skewed. Based on reports, people use the API for replacing copywriters a lot more. So the fact that copywriters is not so present in here makes zero sense. There's not that. So that's why I say it's net negative that this thing exists, because it's just a noise signal you need to remove basically.
Yeah. Okay. I think in the end we're on the same page. We're just slightly different on how we portray that. And yeah, I guess objectively you're stating it stronger is probably better, because if you add the caveat of it could be good, then it sort of does a similar thing.
It's
so
there's such a thing as epistemic hygiene and negative value information. If I just give you slop, it's just noise. I want to briefly go to the OpenAI one and the Metro one, because both of these are kind of relevant to then this point. So Anthropic one is trash, not because the data is fake or misleading, but because it's cherry picked, right? That's biggest thing. And like the OpenAI one was, we went on Upwork and we basically did like the SWE software engineering benchmark, but now with real economic things that has like money attached to it. So we can now estimate the US dollars our models could earn. And it gives me infinite pleasure that they got trounced by Claude 3.5 in their own game benchmark.
Yeah, by like what, 20,000 USD. I don't know what the scale is on, but I mean, it's 20,000. I would love to have 20,000.
It's 20,000 on like Claude made 400K in totals, so that's like 5% difference. Which, like, if it's your own benchmark, it's kind of like sucks. But also, it's important to contextualize this with the SWE Plus paper. So SWE Plus is a paper that looked at, people are using SWE and SWE verified as these like high quality, the AI can totally code now benchmarks. And the Upwork ordering aligns with SWE ordering. But as it turns out, the SWE benchmark has the solutions in the question. Because a lot of these are like GitHub issue reports that says like, hey, I found this bug. I think this might be the solution. And then, like the model only has to like insert the code snippet into the right place, which is not nothing, but it's a hell of a lot less impressive than the reported thing. And if you clean for all of that up, it drops from, like SWE agent plus GPT-4 drops from 12% to 3%. I think Claude drops from 22 to 10. So like it's a sizable drop. And I remember looking at this Deeplands or whatever they call this data set, and there was also like similar trash in there, imagine a code snippet, like the diff, and the way like the version with the bug is like bug inserted here. This statement makes the system crash. And then like that is the code that the LLM looks at when it tries to debug the code, like the issue.
Yeah. And then like going beyond that as well, there's the Konwinsky Prize, which the idea was, make it actually leak free. So it has a temporal element where the submission happens and the submission has a deadline. And then after the submission, you have to wait 3 months. And then it uses the data in between that time period to inform the actual results. And it is only open source stuff, but currently the top score, I think it's closed now as well. But the top score is almost 10%. And yeah, it's just like when you actually look at these tasks without the sort of contamination or like predefined solution, they just can't get done by the LLMs.
Yeah. So like people try to now claim that we're in a new paradigm, the compute scaling is gonna change everything. In German internet, there's a meme of like it comes from the Fall, like the Nazi movie. There's a scene where like the mustached bad guy says, "Oh yeah, with the attack of Steiner, everything will get in order," and then his generals say, "Oh, but Steiner's attack failed. He couldn't get enough troops." So the meme is like, with X, Y, Z, everything will get in order. So like, with the attack of the agents, everything will now be in order. Like the economic value will materialize. We will finally get the AGI that. I remember us talking about this last year, that I think it was like thousands of days. Or what was the prediction that Sam made? Like
he said thousands of days last year. Yeah.
So let's see. 3 years is a long time, but
the DeepMind founder, I think, or like one of the heads of DeepMind has backpedaled and said 5 to 10, I think, recently.
It's famous time range. Like I know it's from my nuclear fusion friends. Like it's always 5 to 10. But
Yeah.
like what is shifting is the story. And the story is now around economic utility, around things that look more like worker bees. And there's also layoffs. So like Amazon fires middle management, 16K people. A bunch of other companies claim they're firing people or not hiring people because of AI agents. And so like the narrative is planted of this thing. And if we look at what actually holds up, it's very clear that this is not the case. Like for AI-enabled plagiarism, like I think yesterday or 2 days before, like the GPT-4o image output, the new version went out, and like everyone immediately plagiarized Studio Ghibli against the express wishes of Miyazaki. Like that's probably still actually like having economic impact and killing like jobs, but not necessarily because of like being good, just because like it's like copyright laundering and you're okay with slop.
Yeah. And then of course there was the fact that like the US White House official Twitter posted one of those images about like some criminal who is of course of, you know, non-white skin being put in handcuffs and crying because of course that happened in the Studio Ghibli style, just to be clear.
I didn't even know that. Holy shit.
Yeah, apparently there's context of like dude was a drug trafficker or something. Like I'm not saying he was a good guy, but like it doesn't matter. That's not the point. Yeah, that is where we're at right now.
Yeah. So that's this narrative of economic utility that is also being fed by the new attempt coming out of Meta of like a new Moore's law of AI utility. We see that the LLMs are doubling the time of task equivalent that they can do with respective to a human every 7 months, and they have like very fancy graphs. And I didn't look into the data enough to make like very strong claims about it. But even if the data that they have is completely like perfectly collected, calibrated, everything makes sense, like I don't trust the benchmarks anymore. All of these benchmarks are meaningless, and it doesn't matter if the human takes 7 days on benchmark X and the LLM can do it in Y time if like the benchmark doesn't actually capture what was difficult about the benchmark. If you give the answer in some obscure file or whatever, like all of these numbers are absolutely not trustworthy anymore. That's like one of the main takeaways I took from these last couple of months of R1 coming out and the benchmarks being blasted, and then suddenly people are saying, oh, but it's not actually better. So there's also like a vibe disconnect. Now we don't have stats anymore, but like every single person I know in my bubble still prefers kind of like non-reasoning models for their coding. Like,
yeah.
And that's another thing maybe to take away from this rollout, that they're really trying to make the agentic coding and agent thing happen, including benchmarks, but the numbers just don't back it up when you scrutinize them. There's also a bunch of other things like on now no longer DeepSeek that we wanted to get through. So like
oh wait, there are like 2 more things about, since we just spoke about the US government. There were some attempts and some actual like successes on various levels, like getting bans to DeepSeek. So I believe the states that have banned DeepSeek, which like what does that actually mean? Nothing. But
it means
the states that have said,
like, for state employees, for state business, we're not allowed to use DeepSeek.
Right, but like what I meant is like they can't enforce that. So I don't think it will actually do much. But it was Virginia, New York, and Texas. And on initial thought, I thought, wow, okay, well, if it's New York and Texas, like that is, and Virginia, which is like much more moderate, and a lot of people consider a swing state now. That means that like this actually probably has a high likelihood of getting a broader, U.S. Coalition behind it in Congress. But then remember that the New York governor and like a lot of people are sort of in Trump's pocket because he gave him a pardon for some dumb laundering bullshit that he did.
A conditional
back on it. Yeah, a conditional pardon. Like literally not even trying to be subtle about it. And most of the legislature in Virginia is also Republican. So you can't quite say, it still has a slightly higher chance because it happened in those, but like it's not as strong of a signal as I had initially thought. There are two different bills that have been suggested in Congress. There's one that says no DeepSeek on government devices, which like, sure, makes sense. If you can't have TikTok, you can't have DeepSeek. You probably shouldn't have a bunch of other stuff. But I guess we're drawing the line at China, not at corporations. And then the kooky one is, can you explain this to me? Because I don't know if I...
So the first, so like it was some like as a German, I am genetically and culturally obligated to nitpick the bureaucratic things. Like the state level bans were like governor orders, so they're executive branch, not legislature. And
they were all governor orders.
Yes.
Oh my gosh!
And they can enforce all of them on the state network and devices. Like because like most entities have what's called like a mobile device management. So there's like you can just lock down certain things from being installed or used, and like certain IPs can be banned. Like, and those make sense, right? Like I feel like you can say like, yes, you should not send government data to China. Like,
yeah, no, I agree that those make sense. I know that in practice it like probably isn't happening to the extent that you expect it is.
Yes, I would see it, but like in theory, you could enforce
in
these
theory, sure,
with a modicum of competency. Which now that I'm saying it out loud, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So that is one nitpick. Other nitpick is like more detail. Like the first one is a House initiative, and that is just like enshrining this principle of like, hey, no DeepSeek on government data. Cool. Makes sense. The second one was immediately after DeepSeek came out, a Senate initiative. And that one is basically like China bad and no more AI from or to China.
And the name of this one is Decoupling America's Artificial Intelligence Capabilities from China Act. So there you have that.
Yeah. But basically, like that one actually makes it a crime to use DeepSeek for people.
A crime?
Like misdemeanor, whatever. Like there's a fine and like actual like okay. You're not like it's banned tech basically. Like the same way like you're technically not allowed to have like encryption in certain countries.
Gotcha.
So yeah, like those are a thing. Like we talked about it earlier. Like I'm relatively likely they're gonna actually push these through as part of the China like initiatives.
China. Yeah.
And there was a massive investment program launched, and then that kind of petered out, and now it's a question mark on will that happen, yes or no.
Do you mean the one about the initial what do you say, five
Stargate
billion
I think
or
it was
something?
called, no?
Stargate. Yeah. No, it's Stargate. I think that one we just don't know enough about, because like things are probably in motion that are just happening, and it's not like it's moving fast, but I don't think we know enough there to say that it like definitely is or definitely isn't.
They formed an LLC already.
Well, that takes like 10 minutes.
Yeah. And it was like the day after.
And then what they probably had ChatGPT do it for them.
And apparently they already have 100 billion, mainly via MGX, Oracle, and SoftBank.
Yeah. Which also, I mentioned this on, so I've got another episode for into AI safety coming out soon, which is goes into a lot of this, like U.S. Government acts on AI and Stargate. But the interesting thing about the players involved in Project Stargate is that each one of them, I believe, I could be wrong here, but I believe each one of them has had a scandal in recent years. I know you can remember, well, I guess I don't know. The Oracle one stands out as the biggest, but all of the others have also had various different issues. And it's like, yeah, of course, those are the ones that were picked. So like
SoftBank is a meme in tech circle as like the anti-visionary. Yeah. Oracle, I'm unsure about, but people hate Gary Ellison. Well,
I mean, so it lied to the customers in that it didn't. It says like we have a certain level of data security, and they just didn't. And like,
and it lied about the data leak itself as well, right? Like,
yeah.
Ah yes, and MGX is Emirati-owned, Abu Dhabi. Government-owned investment. Oh, cool. So, okay, I feel like on the off chance that we have any conservative listeners, like if you don't like Muslims and you don't want your national AI capabilities,
I'm gonna stop you right there. So the last thing that's related to DeepSeek is that Google and OpenAI asked for government exemption to train on copyrighted material. It's not directly related, but it is hilarious given that they also want protection from the fact that their data was trained on by DeepSeek, or at least OpenAI does. And, Google isn't saying that, but,
we know, meta engineers are saying that.
Yeah. So I just want to highlight the hypocrisy there, that, they're saying, oh, but we're making this tool that's good for everyone. We should be able to train on copyrighted information, but other people aren't allowed to train on ours. You can't have it both ways. Of course, they'll still try.
Yeah. Also, they just announced let me rephrase this in the appropriate tone. Sam Altman made noises, and I'm not sure if OpenAI officially announced it, that they're building like storage data centers, so like mainly hard drives. So maybe they're just going all in on scraping the internet once and then just storing all of it, and then just having like the AI just retrieve context directly. But the other and much funnier outcome for me is that OpenAI has bent the knee. Because when they initially announced their agent platform, they in particular did not support the Anthropic MCP protocol, which is becoming the de facto standard in the community.
And so can you just clarify what that means?
So tool use was this very ad hoc thing of like, you describe the API and the model calls the API by like telling you, hey, I would like to call this API with this endpoint now, and then you do it. MCP is much more like formalized, that like there's an actual kind of like different verbs the AI can output, like, and like there's a predefined transport material. It's like in programming there's a thing called remote call protocol or something like that, like RCP. And that's like you want to call a function on your device, and then it gets sent to another device, and that does the execution. And this is like the LLM version of that. Like and they use it to model tool use. So the LLM says, I would like to edit this file in this way, please. And then there's actually a software implementation that edits the file in the way, instead of the LLM having to like output the diff exactly right, for example.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And that stands for Model Control Protocol.
Model Context Protocol, actually.
Model Context Protocol.
And it also involves stuff like you might have a model just running in a loop, and once in a while like query an API and then like get information and then act on that by calling another API, for example. Or like the tool might call into the API, the model. There's like actual like decent amount of thought put into it. Not fully yet, and people are like mixed hyped about it, but like it's one of the things that is actually nice.
It's like, I mean, we mentioned this also on a previous episode, but like Anthropic seems to be doing the thing where they're like, you know, at least in practice, saying that they should do good like information security standards at some point, which is like not ideal. We'd prefer that they do it now, but like. At least there's some like good things in terms of how they're dealing with this. So like the MCP model context protocol is more robust than what was happening in terms of like how OpenAI was using it. And they have said, okay, fine, we'll do that because it's better. No,
I would phrase it more kind of like it's actually like more useful. Like I think like the robustness, all of this stuff is always like in the end, what you have is like a text generator, and the developer chooses how to interact with the text. But like the way it works for the LLM is actually it fits very nicely onto the way this thing is designed, and yeah, like. They seem to be better at this, is what I would take away. And like,
when you say they, you mean LLMs are better at using
this? Anthropic is better at making actual new capabilities for LLMs.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Where like the one thing where it might not be as maybe they just don't have the focus on it is like. The image generation seems to be better on OpenAI now, but like I think that's also because it's very expensive to do, and they're not targeting that domain.
Yeah.
In any case, that is a thing, and OpenAI has conceded now and integrated this MCP protocol into their thing, and they also just link to the Anthropic page now. So I think that's like interesting, like power dynamic move, and
yeah,
I think that is it. We don't have any funny bits because the world is not that funny right now.
Yeah. So I guess being in the U.S., there have been lots of things that have happened. It's hard to stay focused on like I guess the AI stuff, which is my work, when there's all of this stuff happening with regards to very much non-veiled attempts to restructure and reform the U.S. government to be anti-democratic.
Yeah, we're gonna link a interesting Blue Sky or Fediverse thread of a person who got sacked as part of his restructuring that made, for me, this very interesting connection between the stuff that we've been kind of like ranting about in our little nerd corner before everything got suddenly a lot more serious. And this, the one solace is a bit that the realization of the AI cult and the tech fash and the EA transhumanist bullshit cults seem to be seeping into the mainstream and receiving the appropriate ridicule and backlash. If history tells us anything, then like now is the time where they're taking over the institutions and they're trying to like unify the information channels, which might also be why Musk had XAI by X now. So I think it's worth like trying to collect as much information of what is actually happening and also archive it right now, and then get ready for like the resistance against this ideology vortex that is sweeping through the US right now.
Yeah, so there's lots of muck in the world right now in terms of next content that we're going to get out and what we're going to be looking at. We're not totally sure yet, because while there is lots of muck, there isn't a ton that is super actionable for us or like, huge AI stories. But if you have thoughts, if you have ideas for what you'd like us to cover, please send them to the podcast email at listen@kairos.fm. Or, reach out to us on any of the other channels that we have. And with that, I guess we will see you next time.
See you next time, folks. Have a good one.